Hi, Stu Rich here with another episode of Facilities Management Minutes, a series dedicated to sharing knowledge from some of the most interesting facilities management professionals with you. Our guest today is Jack Dempsey. Jack began his career in the U.S. Coast Guard, where he was responsible for asset management and strategic change management for a broad portfolio of bases. For the past dozen years or so, Jack has worked as a consultant and also done work with the International Organization for Standardization, ISO. He has also served as vice chair of the Committee on Strategy to Renew Federal Facilities as part of the National Academies of Sciences. To make sure you don't miss out on our upcoming episodes, please subscribe to our channel. And if there is someone you want to hear from in the facilities management industry, let us know in the comments below or by reaching out to marketing@cartograph.com. Alrighty, let's get to our visit with Jack. Jack, thanks very much for agreeing to participate in this interview series. I've enjoyed our discussions so much over the years, and I know you have a lot of interesting experience and interesting thoughts to share about asset management, particularly given your background and your experience. So to start out with, can you share with our users a little bit some of your history, some of your background, and those events in your career that really have shaped your perspective about asset management?
So certainly, and first, Stu, I want to really thank you for inviting me to this conversation, and likewise, I've always appreciated those conversations that we've had over the years, talking about lots of things about the built infrastructure and asset management. So it's definitely a learning process. So my little story is, I'm a civil engineer. I went to the Coast Guard Academy, became a civil engineer, and spent 20 years in the service, essentially as a civil engineer. I like to say nothing I ever did made the paper, and that was a good thing, as a basic facility engineer and so on. So, so my experience is pretty consistent with what a lot of people have done in terms of whether you're an architect, a planner, an engineer of any variety. You learn about complex systems, you learn about assets, you learn about life cycle, you learn about technical details, and you contribute to the organization by applying your expertise. The light bulb that went off for me, and I tend to classify it more as a lightning bolt that hit me, was I was a construction manager for the Coast Guard, building a medical clinic in San Pedro, which is right adjacent to Long Beach in Los Angeles. And this was about a $4 million medical clinic that was part of a base that was probably the fifth or sixth major capital investment over the last 10 years to prepare this base to bring in some large operational assets. So in the Coast Guard, we have cutters. So there's going to be some cutters that are going to be stationed there. And so basically overall, I guess in today's terms, maybe $60 or $80 million that have been invested in the space to prepare it for its ability to support these cutters. And the last project, we were finishing it up, or actually really just getting it started, and I got a call from a program manager at headquarters who said, we've decided we're going to cancel this project because when we really look at it, when we move those cutters to that location in Los Angeles, there's going to be an issue of retention for junior sailors. And so first of all, it was like, we're going to cancel this project, and what? We're not moving these cutters here. And I was like, what are you talking about? And the answer, so he kind of explained it to me and said, when we looked at it, the whole picture, junior members join the Coast Guard, they go to boot camp, they become sailors, they're all excited about the opportunity to be a member of the Coast Guard. And in this location, they don't have a car, they don't have a lot of money. They're probably going to be, living on the ship. And oh, by the way, this base is in the middle of. It's actually a part of a federal prison, and then surrounded by the prison is the Port of Long Beach. So it's miles before you can get anything that would be of interest to just a junior professional, junior person. So when the Coast Guard looked at it, they recognized that all its investment was going to be the right answer in terms of here's the facilities and we can support the mission. But for the service and simply the retention of especially young professionals, it was the wrong answer. And they decided, no, we're going to do something different. And that really kind of shook me to the core, because for 10 years of investing in the planning, the design, the construction, the upgrading, the maintaining of these assets, it was finally figured out it's not the right answer. And that began the journey that I had as a professional to figure out, like, how does this happen? Why does this happen? And how can we avoid that? And today that's asset management. It's complementary to planning, engineering, architecture, construction, maintenance. But asset management really is focused on the why question. Why did these assets support the mission or the purpose of the organization? And are they best achieving that, both long and short term? So my journey, kind of was pretty typical to most people. I had that event that happened, and it presented me with a question that I've been trying to solve ever since.
Jack, one of the more interesting conversations we've had over the years is this idea that I think you were very instrumental in, is the idea of the Mission Dependency Index. Can you describe the role of the Mission Dependency Index and where that came from and how you think that's important to asset management?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the Mission Dependency Index started, I was a staff officer probably around 2000 or so. And then an assignment came into my inbox and said, hey, can you figure out how to connect facilities to mission? Shortly thereafter, I met a gentleman in the Navy, Al Antelman, and he was on the same pursuit. And so very quickly, we started working together. And what we used was the common operational risk management terminology of probability and severity. And then we changed the words that we used from probability and severity, and we started using interruptibility and relocatability. So through that lens, you basically look at an installation and you break it down into the functional capabilities that are enabled by the facilities. So you have maintenance areas, you have storage areas, you have command and control, you would have all types of things, where you prepare and serve food, meeting areas, etc. Even transportation assets, like this is where you park cars, park lots, or park planes for that matter. So when you break down an installation in that way, and then you start asking specific questions about each one of those functional entities, and the questions are, if this space were interrupted, how fast would it impact the overall mission of this organization? And then the answers are, basically immediate, brief, short, and prolonged, and they're kind of described in terms of lengths of time. Basically, immediate now, brief, minutes, prolonged or short is hours, and prolonged is more than days. So you look at it in that kind of strata, and then you ask the second question: if interrupted, how hard would it be to replicate, replace, or somehow other constitute that capability? And again, they're a similar type of thing. It's extremely difficult, or it's impossible, extremely difficult, difficult, impossible. So you give a basic kind of structure of how you start thinking about, the relationship that functional entity has to the mission, or conversely, the mission dependency of that functional entity on the overall organization's performance. And when you use that in kind of a step-by-step fashion at an installation, a very crisp picture emerges of that facility that starts looking through the lens of the operator, the end consumer who's dependent on those facilities, and why certain areas are important to them. And most importantly, you understand how they think about things, their rationale, their issues that deal with risk or contingency or importance. And as an engineer or planner, when you learn that and start understanding that and communicate back to them, this is why this list of priorities is important and why we need to make these investments, it is very important. But it also shows the way of, if I don't invest in these, here's the potential consequences. Your ability to respond to a contingency need, or to support production requirements or provide services, are going to be limited. And to the extent of how limited, or what type of impact. So the MDI started as a kind of a simple process on how do we score and prioritize facilities in terms of relative mission value. And what's really emerged is it's become a basis of communication where planners, engineers can talk to the end consumers of facilities and gain an understanding what's really important and how to manage risk.
That's fascinating. And I think it leads pretty directly probably to your involvement in the ISO standards organization and the development of the ISO 55000 standards, which, as I understand it, which isn't all that deep, really describes the value that assets bring to our organization and how to really optimize that value. You've made the distinction previously between asset management from that kind of value generation context and managing assets, which I think of as being from a cost-centric perspective. Can you describe for us a little bit that difference between managing assets and asset management, and why that distinction is so important?
It's really been kind of, I'd say, a joy, kind of like more like a labor of love, getting involved in the standard. So, my background is a traditional engineer, facility manager, coming up through the ranks, and is always kind of stumped with, how can we make it better? And it's not always being a better engineer. It's about, how do I better serve the needs of the organization? How do I better contribute to the productivity or the performance of the organization? And do that in a way as engineers or planners would do. So I kind of got introduced to this standard on how do I do that in a systematic way? How do I manage risk? How do I get an organization to think collectively on how to set priorities and how to do just enough? Because sometimes we can over-maintain, and we spend a lot of money doing things that aren't necessary and necessarily overall productive to the outcome. So asset management standards seek to describe the methods of how to do that. They're really guidelines. What's, I think, distinct about ISO 55000 is it's born from a family of management systems. So there's lots of standards that exist in our operating environment, and they do lots of different things. What I found is these standards, the management system standards from ISO, are unique in that they focus on the management system and not necessarily on how better to manage an asset. So it's putting things into context of the coordination of management activities that result in unity of effort, unity of purpose, and getting an organization to be more effective collectively across its multiple management disciplines. Whether it's finance, human capital, engineering, logistics, how does that get coordinated? So the ISO 55000 standard focuses on the value an asset derives or gives to the organization and managing that value. So the standards themselves are really about managing the value that's realized from assets and not about how to better manage an asset. Although, again, there is a relationship and they're very complementary. So that's, I guess, a basic kind of landscape view of the standard.
So I haven't my own self got a huge amount of international experience, but from the limited experience I have, it seems like there are some parts of the world that really take these concepts and implement them in some depth and across the industry, and other areas that don't uptake a standards-based approach as willingly. And I would put the United States in that latter camp. Do you think, is that perception accurate, do you think? And if so, why do we struggle so to implement a standards-based approach in this country?
Well, it's a very complicated kind of operating systems that we're talking about. But I guess a couple observations that I've picked up, being involved in developing the standards, you have an opportunity to work with, many different experts, thought leaders across the world involved, often in leadership roles, a combination of academics, professional organizations, and asset owners, people who just really need to get serious about how to better manage their assets because it supports what their organization needs to do. So exactly that. There is a range of perspective and understanding. There's probably a couple fundamental things that affect that. So I think the modern story of asset management really resulted from a combination of things, usually bad things. There's stories of a lot of the PAS 55 publicly available standard from the British Standards Institute, or Standards for Specification, I think Standards Institute, BSI, that resulted in publicly available Standard 55, which is why now we have ISO 55000. That was a combination of a couple things. One was there was major safety incidences that were recognized, that the management and maintenance of assets, I think involving some oil rigs, was really the precursor for catastrophic events and even loss of life. There was also an activity, back around, I guess, the 80s with the Reagan and Thatcher years, where there was an interest where government needs to be more businesslike. And there was an initiative to privatize large parts of public infrastructure. And in the UK, they did that through contracts, long-term contracts, 10-year contracts, to basically hand over portions of the public infrastructure, whether it's a transportation network, a water utility, things of that nature. And the owner interest of the contractor was limited to the performance criteria that was important to them, making a profit, paying bills, and delivering services. But after 10 years, and these assets live a lot longer than that, their interest of making continued sustaining investments in those assets so they're carry out their full life just wasn't happening. And that kind of precipitated a thought process that we need to have standards that ensure that if we're going to use this contract method, that the owner interest, the perpetual owner interest of the public in these assets is contained. And that really kind of precipitated the PAS 55 and modern asset management. I think a real breakthrough happened in Australia and New Zealand when they took those same ideas and they started putting them into regulatory requirements. So basically, when a municipality, a school wants to float a bond for capital investment, the simple equation is willing buyer, willing seller. If we float this bond and the financial costs of this bond are X, will the consumers and the beneficiaries of that expenditure, are they able to pay for it? So performance levels, level of service. So around the 90s or so, legislation was being passed in Australia and New Zealand that required just basic kind of a fiduciary responsibility that if you're going to float a bond, that the consumers, the benefactors of that, the ratepayers, can afford it. And that started kind of perpetuating a thought process that is today asset management. So these are kind of the precursors. In the United States and the federal government, we had things at the same time like the CFO Act, GPRA, the Government Performance and Results Act. So things are happening here as well. To your point, like why isn't this taken off in the U.S. like it is in other countries? And I think there's lots of reasons, but one observation that I have on why it is we kind of have different levels of governance. In the U.S., because we are a large, complex nation, we have local levels of governance and authority governments. We have state level governments that have different authorities, and we have a federal government that has different authorities. And we're so large and kind of regionalized, the construction industry, for example, has different perspectives. There's different codes and standards that are followed, and there's, I think, kind of a predominance in the American thought process is, well, it's not pure capitalism, but it is, hey, if you got a good idea and you can make it work, we want to provide the opportunity for you to do that. So I think there's kind of a general sense in the U.S. of not being directive on how to do things. Other countries, whether because they're smaller or have kind of I'd say kind of a different view on social responsibility and the use of policy and regulation to direct that, that can be a little bit more forceful per se. But I think in the U.S., it is prevalent. We are managing assets here. We're doing a pretty good job of it. But I think when you compare to other examples around the world, we're probably a little bit behind on the learning curve of figuring out how to systematically do that as a management system approach, ultimately in a way that manages and reduces risk for the organization.
That's fascinating. Now you have a technology background. You work for a technology firm today. We're talking with a number of technology-focused folks in this series. Are there specific technology patterns and trends that you're particularly excited about that you think are really going to help this whole field of asset management in the future?
Yeah, I mean, there's almost no end to the excitement that's happening. I mean, I'm one of those people that I look at, all the cool things happening, and I want to be part of that. I mean, it's, from just in recent memory, we had things like Internet of Things that are now going into edge computing. We have cloud-based activities that are talking about that get us into cybersecurity. I mean, it's interesting. The Army's just coming out with a digital transformation strategy. And it's zero trust is the basis. Don't trust anything on the internet, and developing solutions where individuals in the Army anywhere through any device can engage and connect with the network and participate. So there's these thought process. So it gets into all that kind of stuff. You get into artificial intelligence, based on using data science and genetic algorithms. It's just tremendous. So technology is everywhere. It's kind of one of those things. Embrace it and figure out how to use it. But as far as general trends, I mean, as exciting as all those aspects are, I think the thing that becomes most important, and certainly in my experience, and I lead a number of activities of technology enabling asset management solutions, is the human factor. It's got we talk about smart machines solving problems for us and stuff like that, but the world we live in is people centric. We're people that are participating. We're involved. We need to think about things. So all this technology, if it focuses on what enables the human to operate better through augmentation, decision support, doing things, computers do many things that humans do better. Pattern recognition, complex calculations, doing simulations, are some things that computers can do better. But if we understand how the human involves and really focus on kind of that interaction, then things really start happening. So, technology is great, but to me, it's an enabler. It's a tool. It's pretty exciting, and in my experience, the opportunities of generating value for our clients is really about simplifying and making things easy for them to use and adapt the technology, more so than for the kind of the technology sake. The end conclusion of all that is I always say this stuff is easy, except for the people. So if we focus on that lowest common denominator, what makes it easy for people, I think technology has great opportunities for all of us moving forward.
There's been a lot of focus, I think, particularly in the design construction part of the life cycle of trying to enable an aggregation of various different information sources to support that human decision maker, I think, in conceptualizing different perspectives, different contexts as they're making their priority decisions or making their design decisions. How do you see that pattern translating to the operations side?
It's so critical. Let's start with that. But I think, and I've been a design engineer, I've been a facility manager, and I've kind of walked in the shoes of people looking at, and I've been always impressed with the ability of smart people being able to make use of good information. I think there's a little bit of a disconnect though when what I value in terms of the information I need to make good decisions is the same information you need in making good decisions on your side. So I think one of the challenges or impediments I see in the industry is simply kind of that method of communication. When you're building a building or a facility asset, the specificity, the technical details, the requirements, very complicated and are required to be so because we need to get the right systems and the right performance out of that. Assembling that as a building involves many technical disciplines and conflict resolution to ensuring that the same quality of assets are kind of all there. I mean, just things between commercial grade versus hospital grade, and what does that really mean in terms of operations are all important considerations. On the operations side, it comes down to what problems I'm trying to solve. So all that data and information might not be immediately valuable. Some of it will be. Access to it is great. I think we'll continue to advance our understanding of how to better leverage that information. But as a facility manager, the problems you're trying to solve are a little bit different. Hot, cold calls, people who want to reconfigure a space. Why is it noisy here? I'm trying to work. Those types of things are different factors. So the geometry, the technical information is important to a facility manager, but not always to the same degree as the designer or planner might think it is. But all of us are serving the organization, and this is kind of the asset management lens, and what the organization is trying to do. And I think a lot of this information provides a basis to communicate things, but we still have to figure out who are all our stakeholders, and ultimately the end consumer is the most important stakeholder. And if we at least understand how to get all that's needed and nothing more out of the information as that's developed across the life cycle and translate it for those different personas, from a technology standpoint, those personas, and what questions do they need, then we'll keep on this discussion of convergence, which is what's happening. But sometimes as individuals and technologists or experts, we get really fascinated in the problem and not so much the value generated by the solution.
It's interesting you say that. I look at your career and your background, which is you come from an engineering background, you have deep technology capabilities, and yet as I watch your career unfold, you get drawn more and more into the people and process side of this decision-making process. As you look forward to the next 10 years of your career and the value you're delivering through your business, do you think it's more on the people and process side or more on the technology side?
It's simply both. I mean, which is kind of an easy escape clause on that. What I've observed and what I found to be personally valuable to my ability to be effective is kind of understanding, what does the supply chain need? Your customer's customer, your supplier's supplier, and the ability to facilitate or translate value across that supply chain is really important. One of the examples I use is I'm an engineer, so formulas are really interesting to me. The most powerful formula I've ever found was explained to me by my high school physics teacher, and it's F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration. So if we think about that, force is the ability to make good, effective decisions, responsive decisions to the operating environment. Mass is knowledge and understanding, technical discipline, data analysis, performance metrics. If we call it, that's mass. That's having the right information and the know-how to understand what that information is. The last variable here is acceleration. And that's the one that I think is often overlooked and in some respects least understood. And acceleration is the ability to communicate and understand. So where, as an engineer and from my background, I focused, all my training was on the mass part of the equation. What's the information I need? What's the knowledge I need? How do I make sense of this? How do I translate this into something meaningful? What I didn't really get a lot in my official training or traditional training was, how do I communicate this? How do I effectively listen to what is needed? Things of that nature. So I think F equals MA is kind of a big part of that. And so the technology is kind of, when we focus on the technology, it's really about the mass side of that equation. But if we look at technology also as a means to communicate and to share understanding and to, figure out risk, what if analysis, and advance the thought process on how to leverage mass, communicate that, share with others, and understand what they see as valuable. Now we're talking about force. So that's kind of my simple, I guess, physics lesson on how these are really important, but they have to be looked at together. And if we want to be effective, you really need to think. And I think the industry is probably going to benefit more so by focusing on the acceleration part of the equation.
Jack, our conversation today has been pretty wide-ranging. What questions have I not asked that I should have? What kinds of perspective or learnings have you gathered over the years that you think are important to share with our audience before we leave?
Well, I think one thing that I've really kind of picked up on, and it's probably a good way of introducing it, is the way an engineer or an economist will think of a problem. As an engineer, we learn how to break down complex problems into little pieces, figure out everything we need to know about those little pieces, and then start assembling these pieces into a solution. Now, that could be a large master plan for a complex of facilities. It could be a design product on how to build a building. It could be a facility management program of how to best manage these facilities. We break things down, we assemble them. The economist thinks about things a little bit differently, and you say, well, what's the right answer for this? And in my experience, economists they don't want to give you an answer. They'll give you a boundary condition. Well, if you do enough of this, you'll probably get by. And if you don't do enough of that, it probably won't work out well. There's this kind of this boundary condition, but they're quantifying risk, but they're also thinking about technical information and understanding. So kind of, I guess, a lesson learned that I've picked up along the way goes back to kind of the willing buyer, willing seller premise. So when we think about an engineering solution, we think about the life cycle, and we come up with a number like 20 years or 50 years as far as how long this needs to last. We start optimizing our solution to achieve that objective. But when you think about, the willing buyer, willing seller premise is, do I want to spend enough money that I'm thinking about a building 50 years from now? your end consumer isn't necessarily always thinking about that. So there's a challenging point where the engineer is going to build to a solution that they think is satisfactory to the needs of the organization, which supports short and long-term needs. But I think when you start thinking about kind of like from an asset management perspective, you got to think about, well, what do they value? And as an engineer, I'm kind of more of a conservative type of view. I want to build something that's going to last for a long time, because you never know. And look at all the examples around us. All these facilities, all this infrastructure has lasted for a long time. And I agree and support that. I think that's a big part of the answer. But I think also we need to understand that, maintaining everything, like if it's use a condition index, like a condition index level of 90 or above, on kind of like the FCI kind of criteria, isn't necessarily satisfactory. Some organizations are okay with something around 80, and that's okay. I don't want potholes in my road out in front of my house, but I don't want to be taxed so much that I can't take my family on vacation. So I can deal with a little bump in the road every once in a while type of thing. And if we're understanding that kind of like willing buyer, willing seller premise, and we start thinking about, how to invest just enough to optimize the long and short-term perspectives, we're going to be more effective as engineers and planners, and be able to optimize, the limited resources that we have today. The last counterpoint on that, and I think that the reason why I've kind of come to this point is as an engineer, you never have enough money. You just look at the lament about public infrastructure. The American Society of Civil Engineers every year points out we're underfunding in our assets. Today, the U.S. Congress is talking about an infrastructure investment bill. I don't think anybody disagrees that infrastructure requires investment and it's important for the prosperity of us as a nation. But understanding how to do that is where the differences come in. And I think if we start figuring out how to communicate, what is required and then how much can we afford to do it, and understand the life cycle of assets in relation to the sustained value that they can generate for the organization or, public infrastructure for America, then we're going to be better equipped as engineers and planners to respond to those challenges. And the answer isn't always, if you give me more money, I give you more stuff. That's kind of an old argument that I think we need to get beyond.
For sure. Well, Jack, it's always a treasure to visit with you. I really appreciate your participation in this series. Thank you very, very much for your time, and I look forward to conversations more in the future.
Likewise, and I look forward to seeing and hearing the rest of the series. It's been a great pleasure talking to you, Stu. Always is, and look forward to next time.
Thanks, Jack.